You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Welcome back to 40 Fit Radio, and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. I have the wonderful
Coach Trent
and the maybe less so wonderful Coach D here today. And we are going to talk to you today about your training and programming, and let's just call it sport or recreation, because sometimes it might be competitive sport and sometimes it might be recreation. It's just something you're going to do. You're trying new things, which is great. I think, Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, once said, learn new things all the time. Basically, go out there and learn new things. Take your fitness and apply it in the real world. But today we're going to talk about how do you train and program, or let's use the term programming because that makes sense. So guys, when we talk about programming to our listener audience, we're talking about how your workout schedule, how the sets and rep schemes, the intensity, the volume, the selected exercises that we're using.
Right.
All those things matter, and how we put all that stuff together so that you can do a sport or recreational event along with your strength training, which, as we know, is the foundation.
Right.
So
basically, what are you going to do when you go in the gym? That's your program.
Right. That's right. Because the reason why we're covering this is because we had several questions when we put out our call to action on, hey, I want to go do a triathlon. How does my barbell training program change if I want to do a triathlon? I want to do a marathon, or I want to do a half marathon, or I want to do a 5K, or I want to do like a Spartan race, an endurance race, or I want to do a swim meet, or I want to do a cycling event.
Right.
And so
right.
Let me just tell you, first of all, guys, this is a very complex subject with a lot of variables. And my number one answer is it depends.
That's right. That's right.
we keep talking about that. It does depend.
This is why coaches are coaches.
Exactly.
This is why you hire a coach, to help you figure out these kind of problems.
Right.
And a lot of times you need a third party. You need just kind of a second pair of eyes to see how you're developing and how you're tolerating everything that you're doing in order to know how to adjust, because this stuff there's no way to scientifically evaluate exactly what the right approach is for an athlete before they start training for something new.
Right.
You have to just come up with something logical and then see how they respond and react to that.
Right, because genetically, athlete A might respond one way, and athlete A may do very well, and athlete B may crush.
And then you've got to be able to adjust. Yeah,
they may crash. And so, and I think so. So when we look at this, the first thing we want to talk about is that there's two general principles when you think of learning a new sport, or developing a new sport, or developing a new recreational skill, let's say. And when I'm talking about skill, I'm going to use skill in a terminology. I'm going to use it several different ways. I'm going to use it from the sense that we talk about the 10 general physical skills,
right,
which are all of the 10 general physical capacities that humans possess.
Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, is skill the right word?
Best word?
It's really more like
capacity,
an attribute.
Attribute or capacity.
Yeah, because a skill, when we talk about skill versus adaptation,
right?
And strength would be an adaptation that you gain. It's just an ability or a capacity to produce force.
Right.
Yeah. Conditioning would be a capacity for your energy systems to work efficiently in a given
Metabolic
range.
systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas a skill is something that is
learned.
It's a practiced event. Right?
Well, skill is more reliant on neurological wiring.
Yeah.
And learn movement patterns. And the other things are more reliant on actual physical structural adaptation and change within the muscle belly or the tendon or the ligament, and then everything combines together. So you take your neurological wiring and your physical capacity, and you put those two things together. So capacity or capabilities might be a good word. Attributes a good word, because you could have negative attributes and you could have positive attributes. So those words don't necessarily denote that you have. If you say you have strength capacity, you don't know if you have very little strength capacity or very much. So you have to say, which one is it? But when we're training clients, there are several factors that we're going to look at here. Number one would be the level of development, high or low, of the trainee.
Yeah.
Where is the trainee in their historical development?
Right.
Are they if they're a novice? I can tell you right off the bat, this is a common thread throughout all of our podcasts. A novice is someone who has not developed their strength foundation yet, their basic strength foundation yet. They're in the midst of it. If they're a novice, I'm going to tell them, hold off on doing anything different right now.
That's right.
We want all the recovery resources to be devoted towards building your strength base.
That's right.
So I don't want you doing a triathlon. I don't want you doing a 5K. I don't want you doing a cycling event. Yep. I don't want you doing a Spartan race.
You're going to end up
CrossFit.
You're going to end up bad at both.
Exactly. You're robbing one to develop the other.
Yeah.
And if you'll just hold off and get through the novice phase and build a basic strength foundation, you'll be so much farther ahead. This is one of the challenges I ran into in my CrossFit gyms. It was helping people understand that when you come in to the gym, the best CrossFitters were the strongest CrossFitters.
Sure. So that goes right back to strength is the foundation of everything you do,
right?
Including long distance running,
right?
Because everything requires force production. So when we talk about a novice, by definition, they don't have very much work capacity.
Right.
They just can't do much when it comes to force production. So if we improve their force production, if we make that go up, now they can do more stuff.
They get better at everything.
Which is useful in any sport, right? But even in endurance sports, where it's just simply they're going to be able to do more of the same thing.
That's right. And what I found is that I would get a new member into our gym, into our CrossFit gyms, and they want to start CrossFitting like everybody else. And my theory was to my coaches, which they didn't quite buy into always, was that the first thing we should do with these guys is not put them into Fran and not put them into, they want to be CrossFitters. So they see what CrossFit does and that's what they want to do.
Right.
But we're robbing them of an opportunity to be a really good CrossFit member, athlete, if they eventually want to be competitive, if they just want to do it for the sake of their fitness program.
Right.
If we don't first develop their strength. By developing their strength, number one, we develop their ability to produce force capacity, like you said. Number two, we get the joints ready for loading because we load them in a methodical, controlled barbell program first. So the forces are predictable, and so there's less injury. We increase the connective tissue strength. We increase the tendon tie-ins and the ligamentous strength. We improve their wiring neurologically. We teach them proper movement in that coached, controlled environment. And then after about 3 to 6 months, based on who they are and what their historical development is, then we can let them start doing quote unquote CrossFit.
Right.
And they can start doing all these multivariate or multivariable workouts that combine weightlifting with gymnastics and endurance or monostructural training based on the CrossFit programming. That was now their philosophy is more of a concurrent philosophy training model. And you and I were talking about this, that there's really 2 ways to approach this. First of all, guys, don't be a novice, first of all, and want to go do a sporting event. Wait. If I could tell you anything, wait.
Yeah.
If you have to, fine, but you're not going to hit your peak. You're not going to hit your maximum.
You're going to leave a lot on the
potential.
table.
You're going to leave force production and strength and muscle development behind where it could have been if you just would have waited. So first, wait. And you need to specifically talk to your coach to find out where are you in that process. Don't rely on your own understanding of that. Talk to someone who knows and can work through that with you. Number 2, the second thing you need to think about is basically this, is that once you end the novice phase, you've got a basic strength foundation and you want to do a sport or recreation. It matters what that sport or recreation is and where you are now in your barbell program.
Right.
But there are 2 general philosophies of programming to get you to be better at something else other than your strength program. And those 2 philosophies are really the conjugate method or the concurrent training model method. Okay. Let's talk about concurrent training model. You want to go there?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we get these terms from some of the Soviet coaches that were around in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, 70s into the 80s.
So let's start with the conjugate method, okay? So just to contrast the two. So the conjugate method is coming up with discrete blocks of training, if you will, to walk you from a general adaptation to the specific adaptation needed for the sport. Okay?
Correct.
So if we think about a power lifter, that's an easy example. They're going to have to walk on a platform and lift as much weight as possible one time.
Very specific skill set.
Very, very specific. It's a very easy, clean example. So the furthest out from their meet, they're going to be doing a lot of volume, trying to accumulate a little bit of a conditioning base, but mainly a lot of reps to develop their muscular size, some hypertrophy, to increase their cross-sectional area, make them bigger, all that kind of stuff. And then as they get closer and closer to the meet, they're going to transition from blocks where they go from higher volume work, lower weight, to more weight, a little bit less volume, to a lot more weight and a lot less volume, and they're going to taper towards the end.
Enough of each to continue to drive them to a peak.
That's right, basically. To a peak where they're going to be, number one, they don't have any residual fatigue from their training program, and they're also have got a lot of practice doing one rep on each of the main lifts. So what's happening there is we're developing different adaptations throughout each of those blocks. Right. The first block, we're not developing max force production, we're developing volume, which is basically going to be conditioning that's relative to his sport, right? Yep. Relative to powerlifting, and hypertrophy, muscular size, because that's going to help drive force production down the road.
Increases the cross-sectional area of the muscle, makes the muscle. We have more muscle to work with now.
More mass moves mass, right?
Right.
And so then the second block is sort of a mix of the two, right? The weight has to go up because we're getting closer and closer to the meet. So we're training now force production and hypertrophy. And then as we get to that last block, right before the taper, we're training just force production.
Right.
And so throughout each of these blocks, as you get further away from the first block, you're going to lose that hypertrophy effect. You're going to lose a little bit of that conditioning effect from doing all the reps, and you're going to gain in the force production effect,
strength side,
right? On the strength side.
Yeah.
And so the conjugate method is just simply a way of training one thing, then the next, then the next. And what you try to do with an athlete is prepare them with the most essential, specific stuff towards the end.
Right.
Coming from the general. Now, concurrent training is training all of those elements together. Right. So
at some level,
right? And so you're never going to be far away from doing max effort work for force production. You're never going to be that far away from doing a fair amount of conditioning work.
Right.
You're never going to be that far away from doing the hypertrophy work.
Or skill work.
Or the skill work if we're talking about a skill sport, right? So this, you see, like we were talking about this earlier, that CrossFitters are sort of like an essential, like the guys going to the games are sort of essential concurrent model trainees, because at any given time, even when they're deep in their off season, they're still super strong, super conditioned, good at lots of different skills, right? But of course, even in that model, while they're training all these things, they still will go from more strength work, the furthest out from the games.
They get more conjugate-like outside of their competitive season.
Right.
They get more conjugate. The good CrossFitters get more conjugate-like outside of their competitive season. You know, Greg Glassman used to say, CrossFit punishes the specialist and rewards the generalist.
Right.
And that's his classical line. And it's very, very true that the goal of CrossFit was to make you reasonably fit across all domains, across all disciplines, and to be a generalist. Because if you're a specialist, if you're really good at something and you're a specialist, then many times you can't do something else. I mean, it's very unusual for a guy that squats 600 to run a 5K in 16 minutes.
Right, yeah, competitive
18 minutes.
5K time. Right.
But here's the deal. There are guys and ladies that do that.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Those guys and ladies that do that are generally using a concurrent programming model.
That's right.
To where they're going up to their event, their specific event that they're training for, but they're training all these things in some level of coordination and in simultaneously training these different variables along the way.
That's right. So I was thinking about, like, what is a practical example of that? A simple one that I have some of our later intermediates doing here in the gym is an 8-5-2 lifting model, right? So it's a 3-week cycle, and they're setting PRs every week, but in different rep ranges, as opposed to max PRs, absolute weight on the bar, right? So week 1, they're doing sets of 8 on all the main lifts. Week 2, they're doing sets of 5. Week 3, they're doing doubles.
Right.
And so what's happening there? Well, you could say that's sort of a mini conjugate model in the fact that we're going from block, which is volume block, that's 8s. 5s is the sort of somewhere in the middle block. And then 2s, which is max force production block. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair to say, but it is kind of concurrent-ish in the fact that at any given time, you're not very far away from having done some almost max effort
Right.
Doubles,
Right.
heavy doubles. And you're also not that far away from having done a lot of volume with the eights, right? So that's just a strength example, but you could, if you have somebody doing that and let's say also conditioning a couple times a week in that model,
Right.
and then maybe doing some sport practice a couple times a week in that
Right.
model, that would be a very concurrent style of training.
Right. And I think the thing to understand is that when we talk about concurrence or conjugate training, what we're getting at here is basically this concept that let's say you have a base foundation in barbell strength. You have a base strength foundation
Right.
as a lifter. And now you say to me, hey, coach, I want to run a 5K. So now we're talking about two separate physical capacities.
Very different
or
adaptations.
attributes.
Yep.
One is an endurance attribute. You could almost call that stamina endurance because it's shorter lived, but it's still an endurance attribute.
Right.
And one is a true pure strength attribute, which is barbell training. So how do we concurrently train those two things together or have a conjugate method to maximize both of those at the same time?
Right.
And here's what I would say to you. For the average person that we deal with, which 95% of the people that walk into a gym are average. I'm average.
Yeah.
Trent's average.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all
I'm exceedingly average.
physically average.
Physically.
I mean, there's some areas we're better, and I mean, Trent is very creative. He's above average. He can play the guitar. He can read. He can read real well. He understands all that stuff.
I can read good.
Yeah, I can read good. Ha. So, sorry, man. But
It was like water boy.
But I can read some letters.
Yeah.
And so, but for the average person that we train, it's our goal is to maximize. Here's an example. I got a trainee either in the gym. They finish the novice phase or in intermediate training in barbell training. They want to go run a 5K. Okay. I am going to basically try to, if I wanted to concurrently train that individual, the way that I would approach that would be I would continue their strength training. I might have to pull back a little bit on their strength training by dropping a day off. I might go to 2 days instead of 3, and I might go to a volume intensity model on those 2 days. And then I might fill in the gaps with 2 days of running training. One that's a high intensity interval day where I do short sprints, and the other one's a tempo run day.
Right.
But my number one goal is to work on their running form and to work on their running volume to get some running volume in there. But a 5K is a very short event. And if they have no endurance base at all, then we've got to build that up. But most individuals will have a basic endurance base just from strength training.
That's
I know
right.
you find that surprising, but that happens. And so, especially if you've developed a good strength foundation. Now, with that being said, something's going to have to give at some point, but the give in something like that is minimal.
That's right. Yeah.
Because the event is not that big of a deal. It's not the challenge, the stressor, that's a better word, the stressor that's coming ahead of them when it comes to the 5K is not as big of a deal as a 10K or a half marathon or a marathon.
They're not that far apart on the spectrum.
That's right. And that's a great way to look at it. We're not talking about blowing this guy out or lady out into an ultra marathon.
Yeah, he's not doing an Ironman or something.
Right, or an Ironman triathlon. We're talking about doing a 5K.
Right.
It's somewhere between the spectrum of probably for most people 20 to 30 minutes.
Right.
Okay. So with that concept in mind, my goal would be to kind of concurrently train that individual by maintaining a barbell program 2 days, maybe even 3 days a week, and I just monitor their runs.
Right.
I monitor their times on their runs, on their sprint intervals. Are they meeting their times? On their tempo runs, are they getting their runs done? And also what's happening to their strength base.
Right, right.
Now, if I look at the fact that they're not hitting their strength numbers, then their number one goal right now is to run a really good 5K time, then it's based off of need. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change their strength program. So I might drop the volume down a little bit.
Right.
But like you and I were talking about, I'm going to try to keep their intensity high so that we keep that force production, that overall force production, as high as we can and try to create as little deterioration or as little, what's the term I'm looking for? Decline or
we try to
deprivation.
maintain the strength adaptation as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, my goal as a coach is to try to keep the 10 general physical skills as high as possible.
That's right. So when we talk about like coming out of a novice program for barbell training, we're doing 3 sets of 5, right?
Right.
Why do we pick 3 sets of 5? Well, it's because it's a sweet spot
It works.
between heavy like force production
Right.
and enough volume to cause hypertrophy, muscle growth, right? Because you got to have both, right? And for a novice, those are one and the same. If you get stronger, your muscles are getting bigger too.
Right.
That's why we pick 3 sets of 5 because it's a nice in-between sweet spot. It's still really heavy, but it's enough volume to create a lot of stress, which is going to drive strength adaptation, which is going to drive muscle growth. But as you start compromising your recovery abilities to do that kind of work, because you're adding in conditioning work and running work for the 5K, if sometimes there's a breakdown point, and that's when you're saying you start pulling off the volume. So what we try to do is prioritize when you start pulling off the volume. What we're doing is we're prioritizing the force production aspect of the strength training and deprioritizing the hypertrophy muscle growth work.
Well, something has to give.
That's right.
Something has to give. If you want to overtrain this person, then you try to max them out on everything.
Yeah,
and that's what happens with generalist athletes. CrossFitters are classic. CrossFitting is the classic example of that, and how and not for overtraining, but I mean how difficult it is to go to the games and develop a high level of dominance in all of the 10 general physical skills at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
And so in the off season, if you look at this stuff really, and if you follow some of the high level athletes in the off season, they're doing more of a conjugate model.
Yeah.
The closer they get to the on season, they go to more of a concurrent model.
Right.
And so that's with our population, we're probably most of the time, if someone wants to be really good at one event, we're going to use a concurrent model. It's a hybrid almost.
Yeah.
It's a concurrent model. We're still strength training them, but we're going to allow the strength training to decline some and start developing more of this other thing over here.
Right.
And I have 2 clients like that right now. I have a female client and a male client. The male client is doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
And actually he's doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and boxing, classical boxing, but he wants to be competitive in that area. But he also has just kind of finished a novice phase of training. And so what we did was he was starting to realize his work schedule was also just crazy heavy.
Right.
So he was like, man, it's just strength training 3 days a week is crushing me. And I said, well, let's see what we can do. And I think he's doing MMA or boxing 3 times a week right now. And he's working overtime too. He's working Saturdays. I was like, dude, something's got to give. We've given you a basic good strength base. So let's do this. Let's go to 2 days a week strength training, okay? And then that gives you more recovery for everything else.
Right.
And let's see if we can maintain your strength foundation to as high of a level as we can. And the model we're using is kind of a modified Texas method almost, where we have a volume day and an intensity day.
Right.
Volume day and intensity day. Something's going to give. He's going to lose, or he's not going to get that much stronger than he already is.
Right.
If we do get him stronger, win-win, right?
Yeah, sure.
But the number one thing is we're not going to see a serious decline in that too.
Right.
And that's our goal.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
And I would venture to say that the farther apart the 2 adaptations are, so like when we just talked about a 5K versus the lifting, the strength work.
Right.
And then you mentioned jiu-jitsu / boxing and then strength work.
Right.
Both of those events are not
Fairly
that
close.
far apart on the spectrum. But now if we talk about like a marathon or an Ironman or something, ultra marathon, I would imagine you're going to have to get more conjugate style.
Absolutely.
Because
it's perfect.
as you're ramping up towards doing the event, you're putting in so many hours of endurance training to get the volume, to get the miles under your belt, right? There's no way you can, from a logistical standpoint, do a whole bunch of strength work, but also from a practical recovery standpoint, recover from running, 20 miles in a workout and then go squat a heavy set of 5. It just ain't going to happen.
Do a powerlifting meet
so probably
or be at powerlifting levels. Yeah,
that's right. So
it's
probably
hard.
towards the end, if you're training for something like that, a longer endurance sport, that's very different from the strength work that you're doing in terms of adaptation. Then as you get close to that event, to that competition, that run, that race, you're probably not going to be doing any strength work.
It becomes more and more conjugate. It becomes even more, it goes from general to specific.
Yeah.
And like we talked about, let's take the 5K runner guy, or lady, okay? So you've been doing strength training, you're strength training 3 days a week, and you're doing 2 run training sessions a week. At some point, your strength training and your running training, they're going to meet in the middle.
Right.
You have a bucket, you have a recovery bucket, and at some point, and a performance bucket. You have both. You got to think about it this way. You have recovery bucket and performance bucket. in your recovery bucket, over time, your bucket does get bigger.
Yeah, that's what we call work capacity.
Right, it does get bigger. But at some point, you kind of reach maximum genetic potential with little tweaks here and there to where your bucket's not getting that much bigger. For sake of actual proportionality, the bucket's about as big as it's going to get. Okay? Right. So at that point, you're really looking at not how big can you get your bucket, but what can you put into your bucket? How much will your bucket hold? And not only how much will it hold at that point, but what is that made out of? What is its composition?
Right.
Are you going to be using more of your recovery for strength training? Are you going to be using more of your recovery for endurance training? Are you going to, neurologically, where are you going to be using your recovery? So the balance of the coach and the trainee is to figure out how to maximize that distribution in the bucket of recovery so that you don't overflow
right.
and overtrain. And then over here in the performance bucket, the performance then declines.
Yeah.
And we don't want that.
That's right.
So if I'm training this individual and we're rocking along and they're just not making their runs or they feel trashed for their runs, something's got to give. So I might go 3 days a week strength training. The first thing I would not do is go ahead and get rid of a day. First thing I would do is I would say, all right, I want you to still train 3 days, but on that middle day, we're going to do 2 sets of 5 and we're going to be at 75%.
Yeah.
I'm just keeping you moving. Day. Yeah. It's not even enough stress to really do much. And I'm going to see if they can maintain with that. Can they improve their run times? Can they hit their tempo runs? Can they hit their intervals on their sprint intervals?
Right.
How is that? How do they feel? If they say, man, that gave me what I needed, man, I feel good. Now I'm also going to be making sure that their nutrition is spot on for the specific training model that they're doing. If they're doing a lot of runs, I'm going to increase their carbohydrate intake.
Yeah, if you're not eating more and you're trying to do all this extra stuff.
Right. Man. So exactly. So I mean, there's several variables that we control here. Now, let's say I went back to them and they were doing the 3 days a week and they were still saying, man, on my runs, I'm just getting crushed by these runs, man. It's just crushing. I might go to 2 days a week. And at that point, we see how, and then the timing of where I'm going to put their runs matters too.
Exactly. So you can see how if you start thinking about the strength training in terms of like a Texas method style where you've got an intensity day and a volume day, you can see how that makes it easier to slot in the training for the sport.
Right.
Because you've got a time, you're spreading the work and the intensity across the week in different amounts. So now you can stack your training sessions accordingly. So let's say you have an intensity day on Monday.
Right.
You're going to be doing a heavy squat, let's say 1 set of 5, heavy deadlifts, everything's heavy, but not a lot of volume.
Right.
That's a great spot to either after the workout or the following day, put your tempo work. Right. Put your
little less intensity, but a little bit more volume.
That's right. You're more volume based. It depends on what the sport is, right? We're talking about running here, but so you're more volume.
Could be swimming, stuff, right? Could be cycling, whatever.
And then the other workout of the week, the other strength workout is going to be the volume workout, right? You're going to be doing a lot more stuff, right? 5 sets of 5, 4 sets of 5, something like that on your lifts. That's a great time to put in your heavier, shorter duration sport work.
Right, sprint work, right.
So it gives you flexibility. If you're a novice where every session is heavy all the time, it's really hard to do this.
Right, you're PRing every single day in your strength work. Yeah, the way I like to look at this classically would be something like this. If you took a work week or you took a week, if you guys as listeners want to hear kind of how this might work, practically speaking, Monday, intensity day for strength training.
Yep.
Okay. Tuesday, I might even give you a day of rest. You just do some mobility work, whatever. Wednesday, you come back and you do your volume day for sport. Okay. Yep. All right. Or I might have you do Tuesday as your volume day for sport. It just matters how you respond. Okay. But one of those 2 days, you're going to do your volume day for sport. Okay. If it's running, it's running. Okay. It would be tempo runs. Then Thursday, you're going to hit your volume day for strength training. Friday, I'm probably going to give you off. Saturday, you're going to do your sprint intervals for running. Sunday, you're going to get off. And then we hit it again on the next week. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, as we get closer to, as your development improves, I might add in some technique work, or I might add in another little run. But my experience has been for a 5K, 2 to maybe 3 days of running per week and maintaining some level of concurrent strength training.
Right.
You'll do just fine.
That's plenty.
You'll just do fine. You'll do fine.
Yeah.
I ran a 5K the other day, and I'm not tooting my horn, but I ran a 5K the other day. It was almost the fastest 5K I've ever run. And this has been several months back, and I've been doing no running.
Yeah.
but my legs were fresh. Actually, I did it after a strength training workout that day on a medium day, squats and deadlift and presses. And I went out and I just wanted to do a run. But you got to fight that myth that you can't do both at the same time. The deal is, though, as you get to a higher level, something's got to give. And I love what you said, Trent. This was really true, because these are larger, overarching principles that people need to think about. They don't need to think about specific programming questions.
That's right.
They need to think about the fact that
think about the big picture.
That's right. As you become more specific in your sport, as you get to a higher level, definitely, you're probably going to have to go to more of a conjugate model.
Yeah, realistically for most people, because you think about like the types of athletes who do train lots of different adaptations at a high level. I mean, logistically, it's a lot of time spent training every week. Right. Who's got that?
Yeah, I mean, like triathletes, the whole idea behind
their whole Saturday
you live,
just
eat, and sleep. All week.
Yeah,
you're training all week.
Yeah.
You live, eat, and sleep triath. Now, here's a great principle. CrossFit Endurance years ago came up with this idea that you would concurrently strength train while you're training for triathlons or endurance events, and it works. It really does work, and it's produced some fairly high level triathletes and marathoners and ultra marathoners and adventure racers and things like that, and cyclists. But that's got to be done right too. Yeah. As you get farther and farther along into the highest level of sport, most of those people spend their time at their sport. But what they should be doing too is, in their off season, air quotes, they should be doing more of a concurrent method where they're doing a little bit of their sport, but they're strength training too, really hard.
Yeah,
and they're building that force production base.
One thing that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these athletes at a high level is they are self-selecting also, right?
Oh yeah,
professional
the
athletes,
best rise to the top.
The guys who could tolerate that amount of work, level of training without getting injured, those are the ones who make it to the top. What you never hear about is the guys who washed out. They couldn't handle the training.
Which is a large majority.
Which is a lot of them. They got injured. They couldn't handle, it's very difficult to thread the needle and train all these things at a high level without getting injured, without overtraining.
A good example would be Lance Armstrong, Matt Fraser in CrossFit.
Yeah. The Chinese weightlifting team.
Yeah.
Those guys do an insane amount of work. There's a million registered weightlifters in China, right?
Who's the swimmer that was real prolific in the last 10 years?
Yeah, Michael Phelps.
These guys. Okay, so just put this out here. All these guys are genetic phenoms.
Yeah.
They're not only built mechanically, anthropometrically, genetically for their sport, but they also have worked their asses off.
Yeah.
So
they're freaks among freaks.
Right. I'm not going to say that these guys got there because of their genetics. That's part of the variable, though.
Right.
And so when we talk about the average person that's listening on our podcast, and we've got some great athletes, great lifters, great folks that listen to our podcast,
right.
But we have to keep this in perspective. And so most people, when they try to do these other endurance events or these other events, they're going to need to make some changes in their strength programming so that they don't rob from Peter to pay Paul kind of thing.
That's right.
But something will have to give along the way as you become a more intermediate to advanced trainee. Something's going to have to give. Now, if you're talking about activities like, one of the questions we got was like a hike, a long hike.
Yeah, I wanted to get there. So let's talk about this stuff.
I'm not going to change much at all.
No.
I think that's more mental than it is anything else. I went on an elk hunt for 5 days at 9 to 10,000 foot to 13 to sometimes close to 14,000 foot, carrying a pack every single day, all day long, climbing and hiking and pitching camp and setting spike camps and all this stuff. And I came back. I was looking at my log the other day. Right. That's what kind of blew me away. I had strength trained all the way up until I went to my elk hike.
Yeah.
Okay? Elk hunt. I think I took a couple days off to drive up, and by the time I got into the woods, I'd had maybe 3 days off from strength training. That's enough recovery. And basically, I went into the hunt. I came back. I hit my lifts. I think I deloaded 10% off the top, and within 2 weeks, I was back to where I needed to be.
Yep.
So not a whole lot changed there, Now, if you're going to mountain bike, and you're going to mountain bike really, really hard at higher intensity levels, and you're going to do it as sport, then we've got to approach that more from the sense that we would like other endurance
I'd say
athletic events.
As a general principle, if you're a novice and you've made it close to the end of LP, let's say, and then you want to start adding in these activities, what I would do is from a programming standpoint, I would just go ahead and take the next step forward on your programming to give you a little extra recovery time, lengthen, because all we're doing when I say that step forward is you're lengthening the amount of time for the adaptation to occur. So for the vanilla novice, right, you're PRing 3 days a week. So if you're like, I'm getting close maybe to the end of that, but I want to go ahead and start mountain biking, I'd say, okay, just take one step forward in your programming, which would be, we've talked about this before, the midweek deload, right? So Monday heavy, Wednesday light, Friday heavy again.
Right.
And that just gives you a little extra recovery space that you can now fill in with your activity. If you're already there, you're doing the midweek deload, maybe it's time to go ahead and step into a heavy light medium program, right? And so you may not, if you hadn't been doing the activity, you might have been able to run out your current program a little bit longer.
Right.
But what we're doing is we're kind of saying, okay, I'm going to just leave a little gains on the table in this program, or I'm going to slow down the gains to give myself more room in the bucket to add in my activity, right? And I think that's a pretty good, if you're kind of a less advanced trainee, or more somewhere in that novice to early intermediate spectrum, that's a pretty decent way to do it without losing much, right? It just gives you just enough extra recovery to add it in without detraining at all. If you're more advanced as a trainee, that's where it gets more complicated, and you're going to have to start thinking about the timing of your workouts more.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lifter right now. She's in an HLM model. She's been running 5Ks. She's signed up to run a 10K and a half marathon now. And she has PR'd all of her 5Ks because she's less developed in the endurance side.
Right.
So she has PR'd the last 3 races that she's run, and she's in an HLM program. She's intermediate, and she's PRing. She just PR'd her deadlift. She just PR'd her squat. She's PRing everything.
Awesome.
But she's still doing endurance events.
Right.
So I'm not going to change anything with her. I'm not going to automatically make the assumption that I need to change something with her until I need to change
That's
it.
right, yeah.
Now, if she comes back to me, like her fiance, I'm also coaching, and her fiance came back to me, and he was just like, man, these workouts, I'm PRing every single workout. And it's just mentally daunting. Not only that, but I'm feeling kind of run down. I was like, all right, let's go to 2 days a week. So we went to 2 days a week with him. He's stronger than he's ever been in his life.
Yeah.
We have to look at this from a sustainability model.
Yes, yeah.
And from a quality of life, and from our overreaching goal. Our overreaching goal was we wanted to build a strength foundation with him. We've done it.
Right.
Now he's got his MMA or his boxing stuff, and he's also got his work requirements. She, on the other hand, told me, she came to me and she said, I want to continue to keep the barbell program where it is because I want to continue to get stronger.
Yeah.
And she's reasonably strong. I mean, she's deadlifting in the 2s. She's squatting close to 2.
Yeah.
She's pressing like right at 100, and she's benching way over 100. And so, she's gotten reasonably strong. Now, if she comes to me or she says, you know what, I'm just feeling dog tired when I go to do my runs. Right now, running is very important to her, but she also doesn't want her strength to decline too much. So what I would do is I would change her programming to decrease the volume a little bit, keep the intensity high on her heavy day, but decrease the volume a little bit and see what happens with that. So again, it's all about the bucket.
Right.
It's all about where the trainee is in their development. And it's all about the differences between concurrent and conjugate training. With her, to some extent, because the events have been shorter, we have had really a fully concurrent training model.
Right.
That can only go on for so long.
Yeah.
To where at some point we have to tell her, hey, if you're going to run a marathon, your strength is not going to necessarily decline significantly, but it's going to decline some because I got to pull back on some of the strength training a little bit.
Right.
The beautiful thing behind modern science, though, and the way we're programming today is, and with minimal effective dosage, all these different types of principles, we're learning more and more through iterations of hundreds and thousands of trainees that we can concurrently train some of these individuals. We can concurrently train some of these trainees or individuals more than we thought we ever could. But we all got to look at overtraining variables. Are they overtraining? And we've also got to look at where are they at in their training history and their development, and then also where are they at in their competitive level.
Right.
The more, like you said, Trent, you put it great. The more and more competitive they get, the more they go to a conjugate model. Makes sense?
Yeah, I think
correct.
so.
All right. want to make sure you looked at me kind of like.
I was thinking about that for a second. Yeah.
The higher level of competition, the more it becomes conjugate.
I think for most athletes, yes.
Yeah.
Not always.
I mean, we talked about that.
There are some notable exceptions, right? But I think for the most part,
CrossFit is an exception to the rule.
Yes,
there,
CrossFit's
because
an exception.
It's a generalist sport,
right?
But most sports are not generalist sports.
That's right. If you think about, we didn't talk about this that much, but if you have an off season, this actually makes it easy because it gives you a timetable to create a conjugate model for your training, right?
Right.
And so like a football player, they've got a pretty tight season. If you're a professional, you play 16, 17 games plus playoffs maybe.
Right.
If you're a college player, you're playing 12 games, 10 games if you're in high school, that kind of thing. So you've got a long off season, which is great. And generally that's how we would train, right? So you train your strength in the winter. You just recover from any injuries from the season, train your strength, get jacked, get huge, and then as the summer rolls in, you start building your conditioning up again, and so that when fall practice 2 days comes by, you're ready and you're conditioned and you're strong and all that stuff.
Right.
And that creates, and what happens during the season, you try to lift 1 to 2 times a week.
Right.
While you're scrimmaging, you're doing drill work during the week, and then you've got your games on Friday or Saturday.
NFL, I'll just tell you, NFL athletes and NBA athletes, they strength train very little during the competitive season.
Because they're just trying to, because the games are so intense for them.
Practice is their work.
That's their work.
That's what they're recovering
and
from.
They get weaker, right? They in the season lighter weight. They end the season, they've got accumulated injuries. They're definitely not as strong as they were coming in.
Exactly.
But they have a long off season where they can go back into a different, phase of development again.
Exactly. But it confirms that principle that we're talking about, that the highest level athletes conjugate train.
Yes.
99.9% of them conjugate train. Now, again, we throw CrossFit out of that mix because that's a sport of generality.
Right.
But those people are performing at the highest level of performance, sometimes in the individual aspects of that sport.
Right.
Now, they're not performing at the highest level of gymnastics, but they're performing at the highest level of gymnastics for CrossFitting.
Yes.
They're performing at the high, and some of those people are world-class weightlifters, Olympic weightlifters. But very few of them are going to be world-class endurance athletes.
That's right.
They're good, and they're really good, but they're good for CrossFitters,
right.
And above average by any means. But that's a great example. But CrossFit is the exception to the rule here.
Right.
All other sports are generally more monostructural, with the exception of maybe if you had someone like a decathlete.
Right.
The decathlete is the perfect example of someone who has to concurrently train.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, like a CrossFitter, because they're going to be reasonably good at all the different events within the decathlon. And here's the cool thing, some of them may even win 1 or 2 of those events, but their number one goal is to be in the higher rankings of all the events so that the accumulated average is high enough to win the event.
Yeah,
but that's a great example.
Some of my favorite
training.
Some of my favorite sport to watch is like 90s World's Strongest Man.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of, to me, it seems like in the last few years it's gone more towards strength and power. Right. But you go back to the 90s and you'd have these straight up weightlifting competitions where it's like deadlift for max weight, or a car deadlift for max reps, right? It's just just pure strength. But then you'd also have these wacky okay, we're gonna have a caber and you're gonna have to carry this and then sprint into the water on the beach and then throw it up over a thing. And so you'd have these kind of skill sort of power blends. Sure. It's really entertaining to watch that. But
yeah, I think that it's important for everybody to recognize that your programming will ebb and flow as you become more developed as any athlete. It becomes more complicated.
Yes.
It becomes more complicated. It becomes more undulating in the sense that you have to have cycles of rising and falling intensity and volume. Your recovery time increases linearly over time to where you may be lucky to PR in 3 months.
That's right.
And so it gets more and more complicated. It gets harder and harder and harder. And that's important to recognize. And the large majority of people that we're working with on the average, and these are great athletes, but the large majority of people can maintain a fairly high level of strength and still do their sport. And that's what our goal is.
That's right. That's right.
To recognize is that with science and good coaching and good self-awareness, you can still go out and run a half marathon and be squatting that week.
That's right. Yeah. So two closing thoughts here about strength and how this kind of fits into the bigger picture of what we've been talking about. Number one, just because someone's a high-level athlete doesn't mean that they're a really advanced lifter.
Oh,
right?
It doesn't mean they're strong.
That's right. And so they might look. You might have guys in the NFL who are 400 or 500 pound squatters or more. And they might still be novices or early intermediates as lifters. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean just because they are very athletic doesn't mean that they're super advanced as a lifter.
No one coach may have driven their strength to where it really could have gone.
That's right. That's right. So so simplicity over complexity here. Right. Always err towards the simple until you need to change something, just like you said earlier. Right. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is when you compare strength and endurance as adaptations. Right, we've talked about this before. Right. Strength is a lasting adaptation. Right. So if you can roll into a season or roll into a competition with as much strength as you can, or you get to a tapering phase and you've got as much strength as you can, and now you're not going to really be driving that anymore. Right. It's going to last for a while.
You're not going to lose it like you will aerobic capacity.
That's right. Whereas endurance comes fast and it goes fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so that's an important thing. That's why we always start with the strength base, because you'll still hang on to quite a few strength gains. You're not going to go back to square zero.
Right, and that's a good point, and that brings up that concept of tapering.
Yes,
which is really an episode in
that's
and of
its
itself.
Own episode.
And tapering, it depends. When we talk about tapering, it really depends on. And the number one thing that when we're talking about tapering here, whether it's for a powerlifting meet and you're a strength guy, or a strength meet and you're a strength guy or lady, or it's for another sport, the number one thing is where are you at in your training history? Right. Where are you at in your development of your sport? So we'll talk about tapering in another. Specifically tapering to specific events in another podcast.
That's right. Yeah.
More detail.
So and what we mean by that is just simply tapering would be that last, it could be one day, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month.
Be a month, yeah.
It depends on how advanced you are, but it's just simply that very, very last phase right before you do the event. Right. We've been talking about the training phases kind of 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months out. But the taper would be that last little bit, and there's kind of some unique things to that. Right. So we'll leave that for another episode. But thanks, guys, for joining 40 Fit. Yeah. I hope you got something from this. Send us your questions. We want to hear more about this stuff. So if you got questions about how to structure your programming, we could address those on a future episode. In the meantime, go follow us at 40 Fit Radio on Instagram. Send us your questions at info@40fit.com. And you can also keep the discussion going, ask more questions at 40 Fit Nation Facebook page. We've got a lot of good conversation going on. We've been talking about barbells lately, everyone's favorite barbells. So we do try to get some extracurricular conversation going there. So check us out. And until then, we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining the 40 Fit Nation.